Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru.
Guru.
Welcome to Yogananda podcast, Autobiography of a Yogi line by line. We're currently doing chapter 12 and the fourth part of it. Today's part, which we'll be discussing with Chris and Lauren. How are you two?
Great, thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, no Mike today, we should note. He's unavailable today, but will be back with us for the next episode.
Yes.
I hope.
No, Mike. Next time. Okay, so today's episode has a few different elements. It starts from daily life in the ashram all the way down to the end section, which is periods. So ended my many periods of nocturnal edifications. So lots to cover today, but mostly simple things. So we hope it shouldn't take too long. I know Chris likes a long format podcast, but let's try.
See, I do consume long format podcasts, so I consume far too many of them, probably 3 hours at a time. I wonder, actually, now that we said that, do the listeners voice any preferences?
Yes.
If you are listening.
Tell us your ideal episode length, and we'll try and converge to that length.
Yeah.
Yes. Maybe we'll do a poll one day. Anyway, so how this starts is Guruji really describing ashram life, and it's such a beautiful narrative here because he goes into minute detail. So he says here, daily life in the ashram flowed smoothly, infrequently varied, which really is an ode to routine, isn't it? Who here is a fan of routine? I know in this, both, no surprise there. But in this day and age, everyone likes to experience something new they want to go to a new job every year. They want to move to a new place every year. They want to meet new people, go on new spiritual paths. But I think personally, having routine and really establishing yourself in the routine, i.e. the routine and habit of deep meditation, both in the meditations and also the walking and waking life. If you can make that a routine, then wow, what a life you can lead, eh, Chris?
Yeah, I think I can speak to this probably, I would dare I say, more than most, and envious of the others' side on this topic, because I've had significant disruption over the past, since say 2017-18, to my daily routine, and can talk to the importance of it from experience. So moving around and traveling, living a bit of a nomad lifestyle at the moment, does definitely disrupt this flow that I think is so important to get into for meditation. It cannot be understated. So you've got to really make an effort to establish these routines for meditation when you travel. It cannot be understated to prioritize that. And it brings me back to think of something that was shared during the last convocation. And I think I made a note of it on the show, on the podcast, about planning and the effectiveness of planning into your routine. And that is really important to be able to make sure that you get the time in for the meditations, because otherwise, if your routine's thrown off, inevitably, if you don't make the time for the meditations, it suffers. So yeah, it's a skill.
Indeed. But you've got to also wonder, what's the point in creating a lifestyle where you can't meditate as you have committed yourself to do? So, for example, if you're traveling and you pack out the travel schedule such that virtually every day you know you're going to miss the meditation, then you've planned it incorrectly, haven't you? We're not ordinary folk that can just wake up and carry on with our lives. We've got a at least an hour-long routine, right, every day and every night. So it takes some effort. This time I went to India, we didn't miss a single morning or evening meditation before sleep. So we were pretty impressed, even though we were driving and moving to a different town every day. but me and my wife were both very pleased at being
Well
able
done.
to fulfill
Mm.
our commitments. Yes, yes, thank you. But it makes the trip also much more what's the word, meaningful, because you haven't you kind of grown, not in terms of just your experience of all the new places that you've gone to, but you sustain the best parts of your life. You're not like dropping something to gain something. You're gaining something and retaining something, as it were. So that's always good to do. So then here, go on, Chris.
You've got the answer to that little voice in the back of your head as well. So you can't get away from it, really, can you? So
Yeah, that's true.
it's
That's true.
satisfying to maintain that for sure.
Is that little voice gnawing guilt if you miss a meditation? Guruji knocking on the back of your head.
You did not
Hello?
meditate. You did not concentrate.
Yes,
Just
yeah,
suddenly rings throughout the mind.
indeed. So next, Guruji describes Mukunda, who describes Sri Yukteswar's routine, essentially, which goes on for quite a few paragraphs. So he says, my Guru awoke before dawn. That's a first clue as to what we should be doing. Rise before the sunrise. And then we can start our day well. But he is instead stays laying down, sometimes sitting on the bed, he's saying. He enters a state of samadhi. And there's a really lovely description of samadhi here, here it says literally to direct together. Samadhi is a blissful superconscious state in which a yogi perceives the identity of the individualized soul and cosmic spirit. So quite a lovely state, obviously, lovely description as well. But samadhi while sleeping. Now, this is an interesting concept and one that I don't think we're advised to try. My colleague at work, he said, I started meditating to me recently. And I said, I was interested, as he knows that I spend quite, most of my days meditating in the morning and evenings. So I said, tell me about how did you do it? What technique did you use? All the simple questions. And he said, oh no, I was just, before I got out of my bed, I just got into this zone where I just looked at one thing and I focused on it, and I just, stayed at like blank my mind because I was just like gazing at something. I was like, now, how does this compare to Guruji's techniques? Because you'll remember that when we meditate posture, we have to sit with our arms resting on our thighs, and we have to sit with our back straight, upright. So these things he's not doing. So I was just wondering what Guruji would say about these new techniques of meditation that seem to come into existence these days. I'm sure he probably wouldn't approve. What do you guys think?
No, I don't think he would. I think it even says somewhere not to lie down. Because also you can fall asleep, so definitely not recommended. But I think if you're someone such as Sri Yukteswar, you can wake up from sleeping, go into samadhi and be absolutely fine.
Yeah, I was going to say that. He did actually say that. My colleague said he fell asleep once or twice. I thought, oh gosh.
There you go.
So it's not, but yeah, good point, Lauren, about Sri Yukteswar, because we read later that, later in this section actually, that Sri Yukteswar is essentially he's passed. We're going to cover this in a bit late in the next section, but he's essentially past the stepping stone of meditation because he's always one with God, essentially. So the rules that apply to a self-realized master, not all of them apply to us. And he can certainly leave behind some of the things that we have to do because he's essentially beyond them. Chris?
Yeah, exactly that. I think if you're beginning on the path of meditation, practice, it might be kind of difficult to discern the unconscious state from conscious state of meditation. So what we experience in sleep, in that subconscious state, you might not be able to really think, was I meditating there? Or, did I fall asleep? And it might be difficult to discern that initially at the start. So yeah, I wouldn't play with that fire for sure, because you might imagine that you're making strides forward in a sleep state rather than a meditative state.
Right, very right. So he said that Sri Yukteswar entered into Samadhi, and he also said that it was simplicity itself to discover when Master had awakened, abrupt halt to the stupendous snores. Are either of you stupendous snorers?
I have been known to be.
So you're not a daily stupendous. You're intermittent.
Well, I don't know, because how do you know unless somebody tells you, right? So I don't know. I don't have a partner, so I don't know. Unless my housemate says, "Lauren, I can hear you." Yeah.
Chris, are you a stupendous one?
Thankfully not. No, I know it's a challenging thing for couples, but Barbara, my wife, has not complained thus far, so I think not.
Well, it would seem that you do want to be a stupendous snorer, because snoring, according to the footnote, according to physiologists, is an indication of perfect relaxation. So Chris, Lauren and I are going to have a nap. We're going to have nap time one day, and we're going to show you how to be a stupendous snorer.
Well, that maybe makes sense, because I'm quite a light sleeper, so yeah, maybe that's correlated.
I recently noticed my stupendous snoring abates when I close my mouth. So once or twice recently, just in the last few weeks, actually, I heard myself stupendously snoring, and I just shut my mouth very slightly, and I don't know, I was in between this in between state of wakefulness and sleepiness, and I heard myself stop snoring as soon as I closed my mouth, and then I thought, oh, there could be something in that. My wife may be happy at this new discovery of mine. But talking about in between states of sleeping and wakefulness, I have a reading from the Divine Romance about this, because Guruji, as we know, loves the dream analogy and comparing it to the waking life analogy and the whole dream of creation analogy. So he mixes a few different things to create quite a wonderful concoction of dream wakefulness. So this chapter is a new look at the origin and nature of cosmic creation in the Divine Romance. And then it's this section, in meditation, delusive dreams vanish. And it starts by saying, if by right living, right thinking, and meditation, you can race to the infinite, the dreams of life and death will vanish in the ever new joy of his eternal being. Therefore, meditation is a dying to the world without dying. This is a new explanation the Lord has given me.
In meditation, you do consciously what you do unconsciously every night in sleep. When you look at the body and think of its pains and sorrows, you say, "What is this? Surely I shall wake up and find that this is all a bad dream." The answer comes every night when you sleep. This dream world and this dream body and its pains and aches disappear from the screen of your consciousness. In life, if life were not a dream, you couldn't get away from it, even in sleep. Every night, your consciousness leaves your body to remind you that you are not the body, and what you are, and what you experience unconsciously at night in sleep, you can experience consciously in meditation. You enjoy the peace and bliss of your soul, your true self, and of the soul's oneness with God.
In Samadhi meditation, I experience this joyous freedom. And meditation is the way by which you also must strive to rise above delusion and know your true nature. If you can hold on to that consciousness in activity as well as in meditation, remaining undisturbed by delusive experiences, then you will be above this dream world of gods. The dream will be over for you. This is why Lord Krishna stressed that if you want freedom in spirit, you must be of even mind under all circumstances. He who cannot be ruffled, who is calm and even-minded during pain and pleasure, he alone is fit to attain everlastingness.
It's one of my very favorite Bhagavad Gita verses that made it into a sort of a philosophy of life to remain calm and even-minded during all circumstances. But I love this. You know, what you can experience in your dreams, you can essentially experience in your wakeful states. Such a powerful concept. And sometimes if you really try this, or if you really go deep into this, you can sometimes be aware of your sleep, lucid, I think they call it lucid dreaming or something like that. And you can, if you're dreaming, you can know you're dreaming, and then some magical stuff can take place because you're aware that you're in a dream. And then hopefully you can use that experience also then when you're waking, in your wakeful state, because this is also the cosmic dream. That hasn't yet happened to me. Hopefully one day. For us all, I suppose. So then he says, how does Sri Yukteswar get out of this state? He says, a sigh or two, perhaps a bodily movement, then the soundless state of breathlessness. He was in deep yogic joy. So in and out of this state of samadhi. And so Guruji is carefully watching Sri Yukteswar sleep. In the West, this is considered a bit rude, isn't it, to watch someone sleep? But
it's strange.
Yeah, but these kind of very specific etiquette is not so in the East. It's rude. You know, 99% of what's considered rude in the West and Europe, it's not so in India. And this sleep thing is in that category. So if you two should ever watch me sleep, hopefully I'll be still in the Indian frame of mind where I won't wake up and go, what are you doing? Yes. So but I love how Guruji is starting this chapter, essentially noticing every single thing that Guruji does, both in terms of in and out of sleep and the first thing he does when he wakes up, etc. And he even notices exactly what he eats and how he eats, because the next section really is about food. So food, not just for the body, but for the soul. He says, breakfast did not follow. He says, first came a long walk by the Ganges. Now this got me thinking. For us, our first activity is meditation, right? Before we start our meditation, we do our energization exercises. So essentially, Yukteswar, rather than doing energization exercises, seems to have preferred the walking route next to the Ganges. But again, this doesn't necessarily apply to us. We've got a very specific, Guruji has told us how we should prepare for our morning communion with God. We should, essentially do our exercises. We should do our prayers, and we should then sit at our meditation seat. So this is, slightly different, I should say, to how most of us as devotees would start our day. But in the later sections, the reason why we can't completely follow this, the later sections of this chapter actually talk about this and how Guruji and Sri Yukteswar doesn't necessarily, these rules don't necessarily apply. So, for example, he says later, even in this section, actually, he says that Sri Yukteswar is always one with the Lord. He needed no separate time for communion. So that obviously doesn't apply to us. We need separate time for communion. But Mukunda describes a self-realized master has already left behind the stepping stone of meditation, and compares it to when the flower falls the fruit appears. But saints often cling to spiritual forms in order to set an example for disciples. So that is why, even though they're in a state of nirvikalpa samadhi, Sri Yukteswar he might sit and meditate with you just to show you A, how to meditate, and B, to inspire you to then meditate when you're not with Swami Sri Yukteswar. So that's we shouldn't read these sections and think we can just follow what Swami Sri Yukteswar his routine is, essentially, because all these words are in there and we just have to put the pieces kind of together. And later in this chapter, he even talks about rituals, essentially family rituals that apply to swamis, but Sri Yukteswar didn't follow them. So not even like, our daily sadhana, Sri Yukteswar didn't follow the injunctions of the Swami order to which he belonged. And then Guruji describes that Shankara and Sri Yukteswar had wholly merged their being in the impersonal spirit, so they didn't need rescue by a rule. So, and then he says that they sometimes purposefully ignore a canon to uphold its principle as superior and independent to the form. And hence Jesus plucked ears of corn on the day of rest. And then he says to the inevitable critics, he said, the Sabbath was made for man and not man for the Sabbath. So a long drawn out arc there, but I think it's important for us to remember that we've got, Guruji's told us how our sadhana should be every day, every morning and every evening before sleeping. So we should stick to it. Both, obviously, that's mentioned both in the lessons and God talks with Arjuna and other various places. So, but he paints a very beautiful picture here about these mornings. He says those strolls with his guru, they were real and vivid, still when he's recounting these memories and writing these words of this autobiography. And he's saying he can, often finds himself by his side. So you can imagine this being one of the most beautiful experiences of Mukunda's time in the ashram, just walking with your guru. He even says the early sun is warming the river. His voice rings out, rich with the authenticity of wisdom. So very beautiful picture, and you can almost hear Sri Yukteswar's words, can't you? You can hear his voice in those words. It's really quite beautiful. I've got, I think we all got similar memories, perhaps from a relative, a grandparent. We usually have a very affectionate feelings about our elders, don't we? Like for me, I used to go for long walks with my much older, now dearly passed uncle in India. He used to have a very wise and very lovely voice, and I remember going for walks with him in the morning to this thing called Laughing Club, which was like laughing yoga he used to go to, and I used to go with him. And so I still remember that very, very fondly. So I'm sure all of us can relate to the words Mukunda are using in our own various relationships, both with family and friends, perhaps teachers, if you're lucky, a guru. So then he says a bath, and then a midday meal, and the preparation. So firstly, he skipped breakfast, didn't he? He's straight to the midday meal, which is quite interesting because nowadays there's this whole fad about 18-hour fasting, and so he's essentially doing it without even mentioning it. So anyway, so he says that its preparation was according to Master's daily directions, and that was undertaken by the young disciples. Preparation of the food is quite a holy activity, actually. There's a whole science and a method to preparing food in a loving way, cooking it with joy, and then the outcome then is equally very beautiful. So I'm sure Sri Yukteswar then, taught the youngsters how to how to prepare food and in what spirit they should do it. So that's something that's kind of in between the lines, I think. Then comes the statement, "My guru was a vegetarian." Bit out of the blue, isn't it? So I feel that this section or this whole chapter has got just a series of lessons and prescriptions, and you just have to you could probably draw them out and number them, and if we did, this would probably be like number 20 or 30, wouldn't it, Chris?
Yeah, it's funny to think about it. We've mentioned it several times that the Autobiography of a Yogi with Paramahansa as the writer, the author, and with his face on the front of it isn't necessarily all about him, is it? It's an autobiography of yogis almost. And this is a good example of that, where Yogananda does not make it about himself, that he's simply trying to instill these lessons for, in his life that he's gathered for us. So yeah, here's a prime example of that. You said it's a bit kind of random. It comes in here talking about the meals and the preparations, goes into some detail, but it's exactly for that reason, for everybody, skilled or unskilled in the ways of yoga to learn from.
Indeed. So he says, before embracing monkhood, however, he did eat eggs and fish. So presumably he'd stopped that after he became committed to his path, which insinuates our recommended diet should also not contain non-vegetarian food. So you may have been surprised here to read eggs. But before we go to that, Chris?
Sorry, yeah, I was going to just say, what's your thoughts on the holy signs where Sri Yukteswar says that the preferred diet of the human form is, veg. Essentially, it's frugivorous. I think he describes humans as not carnivores or herbivores or omnivores. It's a frugivore. But he doesn't actually seem to say this here. So it's maybe a little bit different, but thinking about it in real time, is it simply saying that the optimal diet is a diet purely on fruits, or is it one mixed with the overall vegetarian diet? If you have any thoughts on that.
Exceptional topic of conversation, Chris. One which we could delve into for many hours, actually. But it's the answer is in the next line, actually, because even Paramahansa Yogananda in the lessons and other places says things like our diet should consist of a plentiful amount of raw fruits and vegetables. He goes on, actually he uses the word raw and things like that. But then he makes it not religious. So the next line is, his advice to students was to follow any simple diet which proved suited to one's constitution. And this essentially is actually the SRF's and Paramahansa's, Yogananda's advice to us Western folk, which have very varied foods that are available to us in different parts of the land in different countries. So it's Sri Yukteswar has in other places has said don't make food into a religion. So we've got to be mindful of that, Chris.
Do you think by constitution is this a reference to the Ayurvedic constitution? If you're Pitta, Vata, Kapha, or mixture? Is this, or is it?
I
don't want to drag you into this conversation.
I don't know. I would like to discuss this, but I think that if we did go into this, we would spend a very long time. But I've got a couple of things that I wanted to say. So firstly, eggs. So Guruji says that he was Sri Yukteswar was a vegetarian, but he had eaten eggs, so he no longer now eats eggs. Most people in the West and Europeans would consider eggs as vegetarian. But in India, eggs are considered non-vegetarian. So this is why this statement is here. He had eaten eggs and he currently doesn't eat eggs. And eggs is obviously a kind of a gray. You can see how it's a bit of a gray area. It's obviously its constitution, Chris, is completely different to that of a apple or a nut or a vegetable, isn't it? In terms of its fiber and protein composition and everything, from its chemistry to probably how it feels on your body and how reactions to your mental states. So virtually everything. So that's why that's there. But that's something that we should note, I think, especially if we're following a vegetarian diet. But it's not here. In other areas, Guruji Paramahansa Yogananda says you can eat eggs. So you should. It's really down to you. You can take it to you can take it to the extreme level, frugivorous level that Chris described in as it's written in Holy Science. I can't actually remember that, but I'm sure you read it right. Okay, fine, 2-1. I'm sure you read it right. But in the lessons, if you really want to go into this, there's a great section in God Talks with Arjuna about this in chapter 4, verse 30. And if you're a lesson student, there's an even a better section in lesson 14, which has everything in there in terms of diet and even guidance, actually, because because of the controversy surrounding food and animal agriculture and so many new forms of intolerances that have come about more recently than in the past, or they're more prevalent now anyway. SRF has actually put a editorial guidance in there, like it's a 2 or 3 page thing that's Brother Chidananda has put, and it covers everything from veganism to animal welfare to wheat and gluten and all those kinds of things. But it ends with essentially SRF's position is not to mandate what we should and shouldn't eat, or to comment on how animals are treated and industrial farming practices, both organic and non-organic and all those kind of things. But we should just note that we should have hope for the future, but have common sense for today, which I think summarized it quite well. And then it also says we should fast regularly. We should have sunshine, oxygen, and energization exercises should be integral to our daily diet. And I think if you're doing those things, then good
luck getting sunshine in the UK, Priyank. You'll have to do what Master did and Mike and move out to LA.
Unfortunately, we'll have to just make do with what we can get, Lauren?
Yeah. Well, I guess the thing I tell myself is I often walk to work and it's just over 1.5 miles. And I think, well, actually, in that time, surely I've soaked up some sun, even if it's behind the clouds. It's there somewhere, I hope.
Yeah. This is true. The next line is Master ate little, which is another lesson for us, because Guruji describes we should leave the meal just slightly hungry still, essentially not full. We should leave room in that stomach. So when we practice, our kriyas in a few hours' time, our focus and our energy is not in breaking down a very overstuffed stomach, something which I am very guilty of myself. I'm sure.
Surprises me, Priyank.
I know you guys have got the wrong impression of.
I really have, yeah.
And
your wife revealed all the other week.
Exactly. See, you see now. But hopefully, I haven't misled you ever. Always said.
No, it's just my own perceptions. I see Priyank eating all these raw salads at the center. I think, wow, he's there.
One day.
I've seen him at a box park.
Yes.
Pretty small.
But Chris, people, 99% of our audience will not know what a box park is.
Yeah,
They'll
true,
think
that's
you're insane. We're just hanging around with a bunch of cardboard boxes.
Box park would be a pop-up, usually containered, filled, converted containers that are used for, eateries, small street food kind of
Yeah.
setups.
Yeah, and when Chris says containers, again, 99% of our audience will think of food containers, but Chris is talking about shipping containers,
shipping
so
containers.
colossal containers. Anyway, there's this new fad in London where like there's this new like small businesses, they're allowed to like just rent this space and provide services such as food and little shopping things. And Chris and I recently went to one and had some vegan food, didn't we, Chris?
Very good. Was very good.
Yes.
Very tempting though to overeat, Frank. No?
Yes. Did I overeat that day? I probably did, didn't I?
No, I actually don't think you did. I'm just teasing.
But thankfully, because of my, as Guruji has described, fasting should be integral part of our diet. So I must say I'm pretty good at that. So
Mhm.
I think I undo any bad work because I do quite religious with my weekly fasting. So yeah,
Yes.
but that's no
Another
excuse. No
huge
excuse.
topic. Another huge
Oh, yeah,
topic for another
fasting.
day.
Yeah,
I think.
true.
Yeah.
True. It will come up. It will come up.
Yeah.
So now here's a really beautiful, and I'm a little bit hungry, so reading this is going to make my digestive juices churn a little bit. Master ate little, he says, so we should eat little. He's now described often rice, colored with turmeric, or juice of beets or spinach, and lightly sprinkled with buffalo ghee or melted butter. Now, Guruji is, as we know, an epic writer, but we thought he was an epic writer only in terms of philosophy and storytelling. But these words would adorn the best cookbook, wouldn't they? You could have like a Times recipe, in the UK, or a really, really wonderful writer, food critic that would describe this, like, for example, colored rice colored with turmeric. This is just such amazing things, and lightly sprinkled with buffalo ghee. Ghee is clarified butter, which has had the like solids and fats removed, so it's like this very pure, clear butter, essentially, a very clear product. Buffalo ghee is very white, so and very, very light. And cow's milk ghee is slightly more yellowy. So it's really, really healthy fat, essentially. Actually, it's really good for you. But the West, I think, are catching up to it a little bit. So it's got no salt because everything's been removed from it. Anyway, so here he's saying, so usually when I put ghee, if I was going to describe adding ghee to my rice, I would say I take a spoonful and just dollop it over the rice and it would melt. Guruji says lightly sprinkled with butter. I have no idea how you would sprinkle it. It's like this solidified form or liquid form, but he sprinkled it, and it just makes it just sound so much lovelier. And then he says another day he might have lentil dal or chana curry with vegetables. For dessert, what's he having for dessert, Lauren? Something
Mangoes or oranges, rice pudding or jackfruit juice. Oh, mangoes. Nice.
That's what got you to do it.
I love mangoes for anyone listening.
Podcast listeners will want to click on to this YouTube episode just to see the beaming expression of Lauren reading out mangoes and how much she loves mangoes.
I do love mangoes. They're great.
Yes, they are great. So that's a very nice dessert, isn't it? Especially mangoes you would get in India. And rice pudding is quite similar to the Western rice pudding that you're thinking of that you'd get in India. Very similar, made with milk usually, colored with a bit of saffron perhaps. So this one's interesting though. Chana curry with vegetables. Chana in where I'm from in India, chana means chickpeas, but here he's described as a cheese, essentially paneer, I believe. So
Now we're talking.
Laura, I can sense you're about to have dinner after this call.
No, I'll be going straight to the meditation, Steve. Lest I overstuff myself with paneer.
Amazing. So yeah, this is paneer, but apparently in Bengali or this maybe Hindi, I don't know, is chana is paneer. Who knew?
Chana masala, yeah. That's my wife's favorite dish.
The paneer version or the chickpea version?
Paneer.
Oh, so it's actually called chana
Taste.
where you've read it.
I believe so, yeah. I believe so.
Interesting.
Chana
There you go.
masala.
So people, Indians, when they meet me, Indians as opposed to British Indians, they would call me a BBCD, which stands for British Born Confused Desi, because I don't know what chana is apparently. But then I remind them I was born in India, so you could call me an IBCD, but then they get very, very confused.
You know, I think on the point of confusion, I think I'm confused. Paneer tikka masala is what I'm thinking about. So maybe I'm with you, Bragg. I'm just as equally confused as you then on this front, because yeah, chana, yeah, would be chickpeas in
most parlance, that's what it is. But who knows? Then we have a very lovely section, because Mukunda then actually, Paramahansa Yogananda becomes a very good cook, doesn't he? As we know from his Western devotees, because he introduced lots of vegetarian dishes in the West. And even in Hollywood, in the Hollywood ashram, there was a cafe that he opened. It was called Mushroom Burger. So he learned through Yukteswar, he learned a few skills, shall we say, in terms of cooking, because in Mejda he's described what he's learned. So Lauren, do you want to kick us off?
Once Mejda had learned the preliminaries of cooking from Sri Yukteswar, he developed many delicious recipes of his own. On special occasions, he often cooked these dishes for us at home and showed us how to prepare them. Of course, all these dishes were from vegetables only. Some that I remember particularly were luchi, a delicately puffed, unleavened bread, potato curry, a favourite of Mejda's, pilau, flavoured rice, vegetable meat, in quotes, vegetable egg curry, and vegetable fish head, and some other meat-like dishes. After meals, sweetmeats, confections made primarily from milk and sugar, were always served.
Bragg, can you read this part from
sure. Someone's archived this card naughtily. Some of Mejda's recipes were as follows. Vegetable egg. Remember I said egg was not considered vegetarian, but he's found an alternative way of doing it. First, chana, i.e. the paneer, was cut and molded into a large round egg. Then a portion of the chana was colored yellow with saffron and put inside the white of the egg. And they were then fried and added to the curry. Vegetable fish head. A large cabbage was cut into 4 pieces. Each piece was tied with a string and then cooked in delicious seasoned sauce. Vegetable cutlets, potatoes and spices were cooked with banana cone flour pod. The mixture, when soft, was mashed and shaped into cutlets. The cutlets were soaked in liquid arrowroot and then covered with cracker crumbs and fried. So as we can see, Mukunda, from a very early age, was an exceptional cook. And I think all his monastics and all the people that lived at Mother Center would have delighted in some of these dishes. And Mukunda was, I would say, a century ahead of his time, because now vegetable meats are the in thing, aren't they? I just went to a restaurant called Temple of Camden yesterday, which has seitan, and seitan is this wheat protein, 75% protein, and they've made it look like meat and things like that. So it's the thing, isn't it? It's the in thing, and it seems Mukunda was was on top of it even back then. This vegetarian egg is it's pretty cool. Really went to town with making everyone believe that it was a real egg, even coloring it with saffron, which is not cheap, shall we say, saffron, as people who buy it will know. So that's the diet element and food, and it's got me very hungry because it's still my dinner time and Lauren's dinner time. But let's move swiftly on. So to visitors that came to the ashram now, Mukunda is going to talk about. So visitors appeared in the afternoons. Steady stream poured from the world and into the tranquil hermitage, and Sri Yukteswar treated them and greeted them with kindness and courtesy. And it says here, a master, one who has realized himself as omnipresent soul, not the body or ego, perceives in all men a striking similarity. I love these, just, you know, talks about food and like snoring, and then just drops in bombshell of philosophy. There. So a master, one who has realized himself as the omnipresent soul, not the body or ego, perceives in all men a striking similarity. I.e., this is a spirit soul that you're greeting, just encased in a bundle of flesh, and the person next to that person is essentially the same, different bundle of flesh, but encased in a very, 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 very similar soul. So really profound stuff there. And Sri Yukteswar then treated everyone and saw everyone in that same light. Very nice. So it says, then he actually goes on further. Paramahansa Yogananda, he says, the impartiality of saints is rooted in wisdom. They are no longer influenced by the alternating faces of Maya, no longer subject to the likes and dislikes that confuse the judgment of unenlightened men. So that would be us. You know, we have our people that we like, people that we like less. We have people that we get along with, people that we get along with less, people whose company we enjoy, people whose company we enjoy less. But Sri Yukteswar showed, he says, writes here, Sri Yukteswar showed no special consideration to those who were powerful, rich, or accomplished. Neither did he slight others for their poverty or illiteracy. But he was a little bit anti-conceited pundits, apparently, because it says here in the last line, he would listen respectfully to the words of truth from a child, but on occasion he would openly ignore the conceited pundit. Sounds like a bit of a sore spot for Sri Yukteswar, because conceited pundits probably it kind of brings their religion into disrepute, doesn't it? So he doesn't like that, shall we say? And there's more later on in the chapter about guests and people that try and took his ashram, lawyers and courtroom people and all sorts. That's coming a bit later, so we'll cover more on guests a bit later. So here he says 8 o'clock was a supper hour, which is pretty late, isn't it? Considering we've got to meditate before going to sleep. Or in this case, he may have meditated before dinner. Lauren seems to be about to be doing.
Often do, because then, you know, if I come home from work and then I have dinner, then I have to wait quite a long time before I can meditate for food to get down. So makes sense for me, but I guess it's whatever works for you, isn't it?
Yes. You've got to make whatever works for you work. Because, for example, as Lauren says, with some of our most advanced practices, you need to have essentially not an empty stomach, but food shouldn't be a burden. There should be no rotating of the stomach and food crackling and rumbling noises, because you should have got over that phase of digestion before you start those practices. But we can do some other practices that, you know, you can do at any time. Hong Sau can be done at any time, walking, before sleep, upon waking in bed. You can do it in meditation, out of meditation, whilst on this podcast, while you're listening to me. Anytime, essentially. Hong Sau is a good one. So yesterday, for example, Laura and I, I told you I went to that restaurant, probably overate. So I hadn't, I was very full still, even at like 11. And I did some of my practices and then waited an hour later to do the last bit of my practice. So you can whatever you can make work and fit around your schedule. And other days when my wife gets home late, I would do as what Lauren's doing, which is, meditate before dinner and before she gets home. And then unfortunately, then we wouldn't be able to meditate together in the evening. So then there's disadvantages and advantages of all those all those options. But you may do whatever works for you, essentially. So he says, my guru would not excuse himself to eat alone. None left his ashram hungry or dissatisfied. And you'll remember that the paradigm in India where a guest is considered God. So you have to treat them as such. That's the etiquette. And the Sanskrit saying is Atithi Devo Bhava, which is guest is God. And that's a very nice philosophy. Hopefully one day it will trickle into the West.
I was going to say, in theory, I think it already should be. It should be there in the Bible. When the two angels came to sit with, was it Moses? Forgive me, I'm really shady on this knowledge, but there were two angels that I believe it was Moses welcomed into the house, and I don't think he realized they were angels. I think he thought they were guests, but the idea is that you never know who's going to maybe look like a human, but could be this deity and this angel. So you must treat everybody the same. So it's maybe along the lines of what you're talking about, Priyank, but the general lesson is there that you should treat everybody as if they're, angelic, because we are effectively. It isn't there somewhere.
Indeed. And you'll remember later on in the book, Swami Sri Yukteswar saw Babaji washing the feet of another individual. So it applies not just for us, but also every saint and every one of our gurus. So yeah, that's something we should really work on. So next, he says, Sri Yukteswar was never at a loss, never dismayed by unexpected visitors. Says that his resourceful directions to the disciples under them, scanty food would emerge as a banquet. He was economical and his modest funds went far. So another little lesson in there, to be economical, to be a bit like Sri. So some things you can be like Sri Yukteswar, i.e. in his economicalness and his use of his funds modestly. So this is clearly one of them. But he said here, be comfortable within your purse. And then he often also said, extravagance will bring you discomfort. So this is a bit of a oxymoron, because when you have extravagance, you usually get comfort. If you were to book a first-class flight, you would usually get a bed, essentially a lay flat bed. You would get cutlery that isn't plastic, but metal and glass plates and all those fancy things. But that would be, you would describe that as comfort, wouldn't you? But here he's saying extravagance will only bring you discomfort. So I took that to mean that temporary pleasure usually then means that it's followed by a prolonged period of pain. So in that case of getting used to a first class flight or business class, then when the day comes when you have to travel in cattle class, amongst with with the rest of us, then that day will be a sad day for you, because you won't be able to be rubbing shoulders. You won't have space to stretch your legs, so you'll then be perhaps discomfortable. What do you think, Chris?
As a frequent flyer, there are many a time when I thought, oh, I should have paid the extra to try to get some sort of a little bit of extra comfort, especially on the long flights, like 8, 9 hours, 10 hours, 11 hours that I would do between the Americas and Europe. So I have sometimes thought, maybe it could be afforded, and it shouldn't be so economical myself. But I took this simply to mean, and I agree with you, Prank, in your interpretation of it, that material items essentially end up owning you. You don't own them. So the more that you have, the more they burden you. So that's a discomfort to the soul, because the soul is free really of any burden. But then the material items essentially become themselves a burden. So if you buy cars, you buy houses, it's opulent, all this comfort and beautiful sofas and everything, but they become a burden. So it's but more.
So Chris, next time you are flying, or we are flying together one day perhaps, I want you to travel through first class, walk through first class, and tell each individual saying, quote this line: extravagance will bring you discomfort. Extravagance will bring you and then if on another occasion the flight attendant wants to upgrade you, you'll be like, you should say, no, extravagance will bring me discomfort.
It may be just on this point, it maybe shows modern wisdom where not often you would see, but you would see if you look up this kind of a subject where people talk about wealth and things like this, that they would rather, if they were having a bad day or crying or something, cry in the back of a limo than in the back of a regular sort of car. They call it creature comforts. That just shows the modern wisdom versus true wisdom.
I remember when I came back from America, I went, just bog standard class, mainly because that was what I could afford, but also I thought, well, I'm a yogi, I can sit in a normal seat for 11 hours, that's fine. And it was great, I loved it. And then on the way back, you have to, when you get on the plane, you get first class, don't you? And then you have to walk through all this kind of all these lovely seats and the extravagance before you get to us paupers at the back. So it was a flight coming back. I got a later flight, I think it was the last flight that went out, and the business class, all of that, they were rammed, they were jam-packed, and then you got to standard class and it was empty, so much so that we each got an entire row all to ourselves. So we were really stretching out, and I was thinking, it pays to not pay and to accept the minimum of what we need. But also this is true about extravagance, because well, he says it, but in my own experience, so I once invested in a heated blanket that goes under the bed, right? And then and it's nice and warm and all of that. The thing is, before then, I never had one my whole life. I've gone so many years without this thing. And now, ever since I've had it, it's difficult for me to get in bed unless the heated blanket's on. I think, and now I've become attached to the comfort, so much so that it is bringing discomfort, right? Because now I'm going to have to undo that attachment now that I've just created for myself, all because I was extravagant and got something I didn't need.
Yeah. So, and also when you were in the States recently, I'm sure wherever you went didn't have a heated blanket.
No, it was fine, but it was warm. There you go.
Lovely. Yeah. Good analogy. Good comparison. So Sri Yukteswar, whether in details of hermitage entertainment or of building and repair work or of other practical concerns, Sri Yukteswar manifested the originality of creative spirit. So he was creative in all walks of his life, especially in the management of the ashram, which I personally find very inspiring because I try to be creative myself in all walks as well. So I really like this section. Bit of a affirmation that you're doing, affirming something that you're doing could be correct. So next section is about satsang, really, so in discourses. So he says, quiet evenings were often brought one of Guru's discourses, treasures against time. Beautiful, isn't it?
Yeah.
Treasures against time. His every utterance was chiseled by wisdom. A sublime self-assurance marked his mode of expression. It was unique. He spoke as none other in my experience ever spoke. His thoughts were weighed in a delicate balance of discrimination before he permitted them the outward garb of speech. I was saying, I was with my friends having dinner yesterday, and I was talking about reading God Talks with Arjuna before meditation in the mornings. And I was saying, often you would read it and you'd get so absorbed in the beautiful philosophy and concepts. At some certain stages, you could forget what the message is, but it's achieved its purpose because it's taken your mind completely away from whatever you were doing before, whatever you were going to do for the rest of the day or the future, and you're completely there. And so sometimes Guruji's writings has this impact, doesn't it, to get you into this state. And that's why most of our readings most of our services at the center have something from Guruji. And here, this is another, what a wonderful description of Sri Yukteswar, isn't it? You're just reading it or hearing it in podcast listeners, it just gets you into this state of such devotion to Sri Yukteswar, because you're in the room, aren't you? You're in that space when he describes him so beautifully. One of the philosophies here, he says, which is quite a good one for us, lesson. His thoughts were weighed in a delicate balance of discrimination before he permitted them the outward garb of speech. So the message here is the old adage, think before you speak, obviously. But it's also a fantastic description, isn't it, of how to do it. Discrimination, delicate balance of discrimination. And it's something that is quite difficult to do, especially in an emotional conversation or a debate or an argument, heaven forbid. You tend to just want to speak quickly and loudly and not without much thought to get your point across. And this is all obviously big no-nos according to this very beautiful philosophy. Lauren?
We also live in such a fast-paced world, and everything's sort of geared up to receive responses quickly, right? So it's actually it is a challenge, isn't it, to apply that discriminative thought and wisdom before we outwardly speak it. But I suppose that's the art of living in the world, isn't it? Trying to balance that and actually trying to speed up the discrimination process so we can reply in a speedy amount of time. So your boss isn't waiting 5 minutes for a reply, and yeah, it's often in the balance, isn't it? It's such a good lesson for us.
Indeed. And next he writes that the essence of truth, all pervasive, even a physiological aspect, came from him like a fragrant exudation of the soul. Really beautiful. The physiological aspect is quite interesting. The essence of truth, all pervasive, with even a physiological aspect, came from him like a fragrant exudation of the soul. Because when you hear a truth, or when you experience a truth, there usually isn't a physiological aspect. But here he's describing that there is, and it's all pervasive. with even a physiological aspect, and he's describing it essentially like a fragrant flower, but he's saying the fragrant exudation of the soul. So so it would appear when you utter something that's the highest truth, it doesn't just have a mental impact on someone, it has actually a physical impact. And this goes back to what I was saying when I read the God Talks with Arjuna before meditating. The truth is so pure. The description that Guruji writes is just so beautifully done, and it's such highest truth, right? So like you can literally, it's like that saying, like a dove to water, not a dove, swan to water, is that the word?
Duck to water.
Duck to water. Duck to water. It just literally takes, because you're so immersed in that speech, your whole, whatever was happening in your physical body, you might have been uncomfortable, you may be holding a book like the God Talks with Arjuna is a very heavy book, but all of that is just taken away. It has a physiological impact, and it really gets me straight into a really deep meditation without even trying, without using the techniques, because usually I have to sit and use the techniques for a while and then sit in the silence and go through that. If I didn't read God Talks with Arjuna in that way with that much devotion, I'd say it would probably take me 20 minutes to get into that state, whereas Guruji's words that have that physiological power to change or transform you mentally.
I was going to say something similar, maybe, that do you guys think that this could be referencing quite a practical thing in a sense, like a measurable thing, where it's to do with sound, intonation, and the harmonics that come with that? So I could just imagine Sri Yukteswar talking and being in a trance, like listening to him, just like when you hear Guruji talking, it's so powerful. It really is. He's used different words like magnetic, and there's a magnetism, like you're drawn to it. And I wonder, maybe is that something similar to what we're seeing here, like a physiological, because there's a tonation and a harmonic coming from truth, which comes from the higher source. So we're manifesting in this reality from the causal and so on and so forth.
Yeah, definitely. Because I read an article recently about pregnant mothers in the latter stages of their pregnancy. They measured the baby inside the wombs, like mental states and brain waves and things like that. And when the mother spoke to the child through the through speaking, and or sung, the baby inside the womb had this, like, immediately started calming down. The heart rate went slightly down, and it was calmer and more peaceful. So that is a gross physiological impact of just someone's voice. But it would appear that it doesn't even need to be physically spoken, because here, if it was, when I'm reading God Talks with Arjuna, or when we're reading any of Guruji's writings, we're not usually saying them out loud, are we? We're usually just mentally saying it, and yet it can have the same sort of impact as the baby feels when he hears or she hears the mother's lovely voice. So that's quite nice. So and they recognize that voice which is quite amazing, isn't it, compared to anyone else's voice. So different voices have different impact. So Sri Yukteswar's voice must have been, as Chris says, quite something. I don't think we have a recording of Sri Yukteswar's voice, which is such a shame. Imagine, it would be so amazing if we could hear him. Hear his voice. Yes. So he says he was conscious always that he was in the presence of a living manifestation of God. Really lovely. This is Sri Lahiri Mahashaya is described in similar ways in 2 or 3 times in this book, isn't he? Full expression of divinity in the flesh, and So this is really nice. I was conscious always that I was in the presence of a living manifestation of God. The weight of his divinity automatically bowed my head before him. And you will remember some of our cosmic chants also allude to this. A hymn to Brahma, which one of the end line is Sadgurum Tam Namami, which is Guru Lord, I bow to thee. So here the words, the weight of his divinity automatically bowed my head before him. Didn't need any, customary understanding of Indian culture. It'll just happen naturally, apparently. So if guests detected that Sri Yukteswar was becoming engrossed with the infinite, he quickly engaged them in conversation, which would imply that he was inwardly always absorbed in God consciousness. Nirvikalpa Samadhi. So outwardly he would appear as just, an ordinary individual, just going about his business, talking to us, but inwardly he was with God. And sometimes it would appear that he would become too much with God, and he'd have to put on that act again and quickly engage them in the conversation to make the guest not feel uncomfortable, shall we say. So he was incapable of striking a pose or flaunting his inner withdrawal. Quite nice. Always one with the Lord. He needed no separate time for communion, as we said before. A self-realized master has already left the stepping stone of meditation, which we talked about before. So let's move on to midnight. As midnight approached, my guru might fall into a doze with the naturalness of a child. No fuss with bedding. Apparently he lay sometimes without a pillow or on any sort of narrow davenport, such as the background or behind his customary tiger-skinned seat. Sleeping in random places like that is pretty fun, isn't it? I don't know if you guys can ever do that, but it's so in Sri Yukteswar's case, it's obviously a showing of his complete detachment for bodily comforts. I sometimes really enjoy sleeping in really loud places if there's a lot of commotion. Sometimes it's quite fun to sleep and take a nap in that environment, especially if, like, for example, Christmas, if like you've got 20 people at your house and there's all sorts of insanity going on, just sit on the sofa and see if you can sleep. And then I seem to somehow be able to sleep really well when there's insanity going on around me. But yeah, Yukteswar had this capability apparently to sleep wherever he wanted. But he was also sometimes partaking in night-long philosophical discussions. Satsang, you might say. And when you have these kind of satsangs, time just flies, isn't it? Like I remember there's one of the benefits with them of going to and living at university, because you'll meet such varied people that you wouldn't normally meet and share accommodation with and things like that. So you'd get into a philosophical discussion and you have 6 different points of view, and you'd be many times we'd be talking literally the whole night. And as Sri Yukteswar says here, that sometimes the morning would come, is it dawn already? And then he'd just carry on and start his day. And then Guruji says, so ended many of my periods of nocturnal edification. So Guruji has clearly conquered, or Param Guruji has clearly conquered the need for any sleep, both in terms of where he's sleeping and actually the sleep itself. So quite a Param Guru we have. We're quite blessed, aren't we?
Yeah.
But
could you imagine even being there in the previous part that we were talking about, that Sri Yukteswar would have to sort of engage guests if he thought that they detected that he was kind of slipping away into the inner sanctum, and he kind of turns it back on and starts talking to them again. Could you imagine being there for that? Because it shows maybe more the lay person versus the yogi approach to it. Because if that was the case, I wouldn't want to be wanting to engage in conversation. You would want to be meditating there with this, divine being who's in contact with God. It's just such a surreal moment to recognize that there are people sitting there in conversation with a being who's fully realized, sort of recognizing it but not recognizing at the same time. It's such a surreal moment to see. That you could have such a divine being in front of you and still not fully, you're drawn to him but still not fully recognize the significance of it.
But I dare say that he'd, in my case, if he was engaging me in a philosophical discussion, I'd probably be able to listen and be with him in that present moment than if I was to just try and withdraw myself and meditate. Because I'm sure he would be very, very capable of completely absorbing your attention and devotion and just through a conversation with you. So I'm sure in this case, he probably not just partook in those philosophical discussions, but encouraged them as one of the many ways in which his devotees could approach and be with him, as it were. Because it's not, I don't think they're not having mundane conversations. They're probably talking about dream and sleep and the nature of reality and all those kind of things that makes everyone question everything about their lives and go inward. And then when they do meditate, they can practice some of those profound truths that he was uttering in a philosophical conversation in the deep middle of the night. No tiredness, because if for example you just started meditating, you say you left the room and meditated, you'd fall asleep after a couple of hours because it's midnight, right? But here he says that Guruji felt no tiredness, no desire for sleep. Master's living words were sufficient. So he probably had quite a skill through Yukteswar to keep us entertained. But because, for example, some nights, like Mahashivratri nights, you're supposed to stay awake the whole night. You're supposed to, your spine is supposed to be raised, upright the whole night. So lying down is you're missing out on the opportunity of the sacred night. Chris,
like in Harry Potter, where they had the glass, the passing of time with the sand in the glass, the hourglass. And I can't remember, it was one of the later movies where if the conversation was excellent, then the passing of the sand in this hourglass would be rapid, would be really quick. And if it wasn't, it would be really slow. So this speaks to that, the passing of time is almost relative in our perception of it. Like if it's conversation that we're really truly interested in, joyful about, the passing of time will seem very quick. So Guruji says, "Oh, it's dawn," like it's a surprise, like, gosh, the time passed really quick. So it just reminds me of that. So obviously the conversation they were fully raptured in it. The time passed rapidly quick.
Often this happens sometimes at the center as well. After like meditation might finish at 9 p.m. and I might be locking up, and people will be having a really lovely conversation, but I need to lock up and they're forgetting time. So I'd have to just say, "You need to take this to the streets, my friends." The center must close. Guruji inspired philosophical discussions at the center. Always lovely. They seem to, you could go on forever and ever, couldn't you, sometimes? On that note, let us end it. It's been almost 1.5 hours, so let us not also go on forever and ever. Let us draw a close, and we shall see you next time. Thank you, Lauren and Chris.
Oh, thank you both.
Jai Guru.